Hello, Player One. Welcome to the Gaming History Club. My name is Gabby.
Hello, and I'm JP. When we play games, there's a boundary between us and the game. But what if we could truly feel like we exist inside of the game, and everywhere we turn our heads to look is video game world? Is VR the next level of immersion? So, Gabi, a question that has been lingering in my mind a lot when we were researching for this episode. When will VR finally become mainstream? And I mean mainstream as in just as many people play, on a VR headset than they do own a video game console or play games on their computer. When will that finally happen?
You know what? It's actually really difficult for me to imagine that in a way because I like third person games, which just doesn't go with VR in a way.
I see, what you
Yeah,
mean.
right?
Yeah, okay, yeah. It really would like to be like a first-person experience, yeah.
Exactly.
But there's nothing forcing it to be a first-person experience. It's just like I mean, yeah, actually it does, yeah, because it
It
is
kind of
about
does stuff, yeah.
because it is about being inside of the video game, yeah. But what if you play a god who is like taking control of a person in third-person view? Does that count?
Then why do I need like my own info? You know what?
Okay, yeah.
It's like technicality,
I
isn't
get
it?
you.
But
I
yeah,
get you.
yeah,
But it
yeah.
would make first person a whole better if it was like virtual first person reality.
To put it into perspective, I think it's a bit sad. I only know one of our friends who have VR,
Yeah.
and and that's brothers.
Yeah, and it's just Brad,
Yeah, I mean
basically.
not just Brad,
It's
but
just Brad.
it's literally only Brad who plays some games on VR, and very rarely actually.
Well, let's talk about stats a little bit, I guess. So, in terms of VR, the most popular ones are the Oculus line of VR headsets. So the Oculus Quests, right? So they were bought by Meta eventually. But if we take them, they've sold around estimated 20 million headsets. But that's obviously there's different generations of the headset. But if we were to compare them against some video game consoles, they sold roughly the same amount as GameCubes. But they are still 7 times less successful than the most popular video game console of all time, or at least the best selling one of all time, the PlayStation 2, with 160 million units sold. So that just gives us a bit of perspective how popular they are to be bought by gamers. But then the thing is, they have a really bad retention rate. So since we talked a little bit about Brad is a prime example, not just of a human being, but also a regular video gamer.
Okay.
So he is not going to play it for a really long time and then randomly play it one night, not for very long, maybe half an hour
Yeah.
before that dizziness kicks in. And then he's probably not going to play it again for a while. And that is a common example. This happens a lot with VR. So there's that thing to think about as well. To top it all off, Meta is actually making a loss on a Request headset that they sell.
Why do they sell it if they make a loss?
And that's a good question. So this actually isn't a rare occurrence. This happens to like get the console out. They're gonna be making more from like sales of games basically, and developers like purchasing the rights to release the game on the console. Yeah. Also, I guess they want to be the front runners for when eventually one day maybe it does become like the next big thing. It becomes mainstream, then Meta is going to be the established brand that already has VR headsets.
I think that's definitely one of the limitations of VR nowadays. You just can't make it small enough, cheap enough, ergonomic enough for people to play it for a long time. I think that's definitely one of the limitations. Another thing, in my opinion, is how you feel disconnected a little bit with the world. Like, if you play multiplayer, there is no difference having your friend playing in the same room with you, or they're just playing online somewhere else. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm a traditional one, right? Play with a console. You can see each other. That feels a little bit more me somehow. So I will call that limitations.
traditional couch potato style of playing video games, yeah. I'm quite the same, even if you give me like a Wii, like,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, I'll play the Wii, but I'm gonna be still sitting on my couch and flicking my wrist rather than like
Oh my
pretending
God.
to throw a bowling ball.
JP, that's just lazy.
Yeah, that's probably just lazy. Yeah. But you're right, it's almost like you're wearing a helmet, right? And
I
then,
know.
because there's speakers, it also sounds like you can't really hear much of what's going on the outside. Obviously, some VR headsets try and get around that. So, like the Apple Vision Pro, for example, you can like turn off the virtual elements so you can still see more of the
Trying to blend.
normal world
Yeah.
around you. It's a little bit creepy. Maybe one day if we just have glasses and they just do everything.
Yeah, actually, I'm really waiting for the time where VR getting a lot more smaller and smaller, more comfortable, and just more wearable rather than making you look like some Robocop. Well, but as always, right, it's important to actually define what VR is. Because VR isn't simply just a TV screen glued to your eyeballs. If that's the case, then you would be able to play third person game and it shouldn't matter, basically. But it does matter, right? I mean, it needs to be immersive. It needs to be creating that world surrounding you.
So how do we define it, Gabby? Come on, this is the best part of any episode that we do, to define.
Well, the definition.
Yes, of course.
Sure. So the Oxford Dictionary defines it as the computer-generated simulation of a three-dimensional image or environment that can be interacted with in a seemingly real or physical way by a person using a special electronic equipment such as a helmet with a screen inside or gloves fitted with sensors. I think virtual really is the key word here, though. It's supposed to be an almost reality, not an actual simulation, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, because if this was an actual simulation reality episode, I'd probably make a lot more Matrix references throughout.
Well, luckily you don't.
So let's dive right in, player one. So where's a good start to actually talk about VR? And I think we found the perfect point to jump right in. And talking about glasses already a little bit earlier, we'll see just where it all started actually.
Wait. They already had VR, like normal glasses?
No, but listen
Oh,
up.
okay,
Listen
cool.
up, Gabby. So let's start in 1935 when a science fiction writer named Stanley Weinbaum created a short story and released it. And the short story is called Pygmalion's Spectacles. And in the short story, a professor invents a pair of goggles which enabled the wearer to be the main character inside of a movie. The plot revolves around you, as in the wearer, and you not only see and hear the story, but you also taste, smell, and touch it. And the characters in the so-called movie talk to you and react to your actions. I mean, quote-unquote movie, because, I mean, these guys didn't have video games, right? So what's the nearest kind of example? Like, oh, it's a movie, but the characters, they kind of like talk about you and the plot revolves around you. So, yeah, here we can see already, like, how Stanley Weinbaum actually created the entire concept.
Or predicted.
Predicted, yeah. Not invented, but, like, yeah, the entire concept. And, like, in such a fantastic way where it's even way better than we could still do now. We can't just make glasses, and we certainly can't smell or touch things using the glasses either. And he just completely invents the entire concept of like VR.
Using this short story that he wrote, yeah.
Absolutely. Really interesting, Stanley, actually. So, unfortunately, he passed away of lung cancer quite young at the age of only 33 years old.
Oh my god, that's your age.
I know, yeah. And in December of that same year, in 1935. And so this wasn't actually the story that made him like quite a famous science fiction writer. But he was very much well known already because he was one of them early science fiction writers who were not going with that old school retro sci-fi, but they were already pushing like the more modern type of sci-fi. So yeah, it's really impressive. In another one of his short stories as well, this I found was really interesting. There's a device that's invented where the user sees a visualization of his ideals. So the example that's given inside of the short story is that someone could, for example, see the perfect image of like a woman. Rather than just fantasizing about what his perfect woman might look like, this device actually just puts it in front of his eyes, like, look, this is your perfect woman, how you would like picture her if you could, ideally. Which reminds me kind of the mirror of Erised in Harry Potter.
Ah, yeah, but I guess Mirror of Erised is a little bit more your deepest desire.
Yeah, so they're not quite
But yeah, I get what you mean.
the same thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Stanley actually came up with like the idea of like something showing you your deepest desire or your, your ideals, but still super, super amazing.
Oh my god, I'm so gonna use that mirror to like, what do I actually want to eat? Because I always can't decide.
Aha.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay. Or what would my perfect video game look like so I can just make it myself and sell it?
Ah, see what I mean?
Yeah.
Take it out of your brain. But with that, though, I think it's safe to say that creating a VR headset in the 30s would have been less probable than to call it impossible. Do you remember those plastic goggle things when you were a kid? You could hold them in front of your eyes, like binoculars, and you would see like a picture, and you could press button, the picture will flick, change to like
Oh,
different
yes.
picture.
Yes.
I think like Disney might have made a few back then. But
Yeah, I had a
yeah.
Disney one.
You had a Disney one?
Oh, yeah,
I
definitely.
think I had like a normal-ish one with just like some scenery kind of deal. But yeah, so those were called Viewmaster, which is a trademark name by the original manufacturer called Soyuz and introduced in 1939. Eventually, this would become much more popular to be made for kids, but for a long time, these were primarily for all ages, including adults, to be honest. It's so you could see the tourist attractions and landmarks and almost, I feel like I'm there type of way, like you're the one taking the picture of those scenery yourself.
I could have just held up a postcard in front of these adults.
I completely agree. I always felt it was very gimmicky. I think the only thing that makes me always want to use it is just because you can flick it around. I'm
Yeah.
very lame.
So it's like holding up binoculars. Like, look, you are actually, like a mile away from the Eiffel Tower.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is quite cute. But yeah, I mean, Viewmaster is definitely still a far cry from a real VR or the VR that we know nowadays. And as a matter of fact, the term virtual reality is still many years from ever being coined at that point. But this gives us a good sense of what similar things we had this far back in time in the 30s, which is, very basic in my honest opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really VR just yet, but like just to give you guys, player one, an idea of like the closest thing we had was the
Around
Viewmaster.
almost 100 years ago. Yeah, it was Viewmaster. Yeah.
So for the first real attempt at virtual reality, as far as we are concerned, and where it's similar to what was envisioned in Pygmalion spectacles, we have to fast forward quite a little bit to 1955. So filmmaker Morton Heilig, inspired heavily by the experience you get from watching a movie in cinemas, first envisioned an experience theater, calling it the cinema of the future. So Morton actually built a prototype of his vision and named it the Sensorama in 1962. And he patented the Sensorama in 1964. So what is the Sensorama? Well, it looks strikingly similar to an arcade video game cabinet that you would sit in front of. And it had like a rounded squarish tunnel that you would then stick your face into. And the Sensorama was absolutely incredible and very ambitious for 60s technology. So you had a stereoscopic color display, able to display 3D, quote-unquote 3D images in a wide-angle view. There was stereo sound. There was fans that simulate winds and actual aromas that would trigger in certain parts of the movie as well. And the chair that you would sit on vibrates, and this is where the term sensorama comes from. Like it tries to like, have all your senses like triggered during the movie experience.
Old school 4DX experience.
Yeah, but the crazy thing is like this was not achieved with any electronic means. This was all mechanical. There was no chip, no computer, nothing. This was all like with quote unquote mechanical tracks. So you would start the movie and there's like tracks going. I guess the movie's playing the entire time, the film and the sound too maybe, but then like at a certain point, maybe like 5 seconds in, you would get like a aroma that would trigger to like exactly that point with like a exact smell. And the same with the vibrating chair and the wind fans. So yeah, pretty cool idea, especially it's not electronic. I think that's the thing that gets me the most about the Sensorama. That's what I think is the coolest. So, unfortunately, work on producing the Sensorama halted, and the public would never be able to experience it commercially outside of the prototypes that he built. The cost of filming the movies was just too much. It was very difficult in general. So, the cameraman, he has to like wear three separate massive cameras mounted to him just to film the entire thing because it's a wide angle experience as well. And obviously, things were very much a square ratio back in them filming days, right? As well as, I don't think as a business, you would really understand like how you could actually put this commercially out to people. You can't stick this into cinemas. Like, would you have like a massive room with like 20 of these Sensораmas right next to them? Where would you put one if you just had one available? There was just some issues like figuring out how to actually get this out onto the quote unquote market. The prototype still works today, but you cannot actually use it, unfortunately. It used a movie simulating riding a motorcycle in New York City. That's what the prototype had. And the fans would simulate the wind. The smell maker machine used chemicals to simulate the smell of petrol fumes.
Ew.
And pizza as you
Okay,
drive
that's
along
super.
a certain part of the city in New York. It's like, oh, I'm driving past a pizzeria. Oh, I must smell pizza now. Yeah, the chair would vibrate gently to give the illusion of the being on the motorcycle. And obviously, you could see a movie and hear the environment as well inside of the Sensorama. Although, of course, there was no form of interaction with the movie, it wasn't able to respond to the viewer in any way. So it's not true VR. But as far as like the senses are concerned, yeah, very Pygmalion's spectacles. Yeah, you could see, hear, touch, smell.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it comes close in that way to VR.
I mean, you know what? I wouldn't want to watch a movie just to like smell petrol fumes, but that's still really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, look at 2025. We still don't have VR where you can smell things, right? But hey, we only just started 2025. Who knows what happens?
True that. So next stop, player one, is 1968. So how many years is that? That's still in the same decade, is it?
Yes, 4 years.
4 years, yeah. And we are going to actually get closer and closer to what we commonly think of as VR very quickly now. After all, we're only 1 year away from landing on the moon.
Yeah, to put it into perspective.
Let's talk a little about the man himself first, though. Ivan Sutherland is many things, including a computer scientist and internet pioneer. However, he's probably best known for his vital contributions to computer graphics. As if that wasn't enough, he's also a great teacher, because actually a lot of his students would contribute to computer graphics in their own way. I mean, one of his students is a co-founder of Pixar. I mean, who doesn't know Pixar, right? Another one is the first person to render 3D images. That's a big thing. And also developer of anti-aliasing methods, which I'm sure if you play with your PC, you're probably pretty familiar with that. So yeah, definitely like impressive students, as impressive as himself. Among Ivan's own inventions is Sketchpad from 1963. You can imagine it as drawing with a pen on a computer screen. This is by no means a minor accomplishment. Ivan inspired graphical user interfaces as well as CAD computer-aided design, and it was the very first time that a window, quote-unquote window, of some sort was used on a computer screen. So your computer is not just full of text, basically. It completely changed what had been done before with computers. But interesting for us is his contributions to VR, and his contribution was named quite epically actually, the Sword of Damocles. So what is this Sword of Damocles? It's a head-mounted display, and it might be the first time that the term HMD was being used. Though two things need pointing out here. While it was a head-mounted device, it was not portable. The helmet was attached to a mechanical arm that hung from the ceiling, and the user's head would be strapped into the helmet. If you imagine it to be like a fancy torture device, player one, you're kind of on the right lane on this.
Yeah, it does not look comfortable
I don't
whatsoever.
think so.
As a matter of fact, people wearing it look kind of confused, even though you can't see their face. It looks like something where a computer, like an AI, is like torturing this human with like visions of doom.
Yeah, but you
It
know
does
what?
not look good.
It may not look good, but it definitely is impressive, though. Like, the Sword of Damocles was not just VR, it's also augmented reality, or AR. So, the difference is AR basically puts a graphic layer on top of the real world that you see, rather than immerse you into a completely fake reality like how VR works. But anyway, the Sword of Damocles was able to display simple wireframe shapes and rooms. When turning your head left or right, the arm from which the helmet is suspended to, it would rotate, and this rotation allowed the computer to know how much your head is tilting, so it can show what you're seeing depending on your head movement.
It definitely looks really retro. It's weird to see something like that in like black and white old school footage. Like it shouldn't really exist. Like there's some time traveler who like brought some things back in time and then like took a video of it. It's a bit crazy. It's a little bit weird to look, don't you think?
It looks modern but very old school at the same time.
Yeah, it's dope. I would recommend anyone to like have a quick look at this sort of Damocles on YouTube. It's so cool. So let's talk about another virtual reality pioneer, Myron Kruger. So he was another computer and artificial reality researcher who brought a much needed human touch now in the way of artistry to the virtual computer worlds. His work started in 1969 using computer generated environments with the help of video projection, displays, cameras, and other position sensing technology. He saw that to interact with computers, we needed to sit down and we needed to use a 100-year-old invention, the typewriter, to very symbolically command and control the computer. Myron wanted to enable more natural human interaction with computer technology, though. He saw how we use them for purely work and efficiency means. Make me spreadsheets, calculate stats, predict the weather, look at some data. But he realized that we could do a lot more with computers than, just work. Using what he referred to as artificial reality, which is just a term to talk about both virtual and augmented realities at the same time, he invented the video place, which allowed people to interact with computers by seeing their own projection on a screen and interacting with computers in that way. Though this wasn't used with a headset, it's an important step in terms of the virtual environment itself. So, to interact and command the computer inside of virtual reality, although the person themselves wasn't inside of that virtual reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of looking like it projects your shadow on the screen, and you somehow can lift your arm, point to some letters,
Yeah,
and it will choose those letters to write something, right?
absolutely, yeah. So if you were stood in the middle of a room and there's like a light shining like behind you, in front of you there's a projector, right? And you could see yourself move around like your shadow. But then, for example, you'd have like a row of numbers at the top of that screen, and if your reflection or your shadow like touches a number, you could start playing a video, for example. So it's not, I guess, like super impressive for us nowadays, but he was the first one to do that, to bother making a computer be able to read that, like, you're pointing at something, and now I'm going to do things based on you just touching things.
By this point, though, the military industrial complex even starts smelling blood too, so they also want to get into the VR bandwagon. So, military operations such as rescue missions are usually practiced by soldiers in a professionally replicated environment so that you can improve the chance of success, demonstrate strategies and tactics to be used in the real operations. Imagine it as you actually build fake walls to replicate the real environment. So you can imagine if hostages being held captive in an office building, you would replicate the layout of the floor where the hostages are being held captive so you can practice how you would go about rescuing the hostages. Sounds like a lot of fun, to be fair.
Yeah, it sounds like paintball, basically, in a way.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode where they do a simulated rescue mission thing with the other agency. But anyway,
Oh, yeah, I remember.
yeah, that's a great episode. Sorry,
They
Player
have
One.
beef with the NSA or something, don't they?
But anyway, um, the goal is basically to familiarize soldiers quickly with new territory. And so, DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects, funded research into a system developed by a team at MIT together with Andrew Lipman to build a program to serve as a virtual tool for exactly the reason we explained before. So rather than you actually build the fake wall, you make that into a VR experience. So the result was the Aspen movie map. And you can kind of imagine it by thinking of it as a Google Street, but from 1977. So a car was used to take photographs of Aspen, Colorado, and photographs were transferred onto Laserdisc. Using a computer program, you could then freely move around a virtual recreation of Aspen, Colorado.
Mind-blowing, isn't it? Like, you think these things are, like, brand new, like Google Street View? Like, nah, it's just a whole lot cheaper and more readily available these days. But, yo, these guys were, like, inventing things, like, so long ago. There is nothing new under the sun here. Yeah, so let's move along a little bit. So, it's 1982, and finger tracking gloves are invented by Daniel Sandin and Thomas DeFanti, and they paved way to interact with the virtual environments of the future. And it's not going to be a whole lot longer into the future now either, because in 1985, VPL Research is founded by Jaron Lanier and Thomas Zimmerman. VPL stands for Visual Programming Lab, and it's the first ever company to sell head-mounted displays, which they called iPhone, but not like I, but like, you know, you see with your eyes.
Okay.
iPhone, yeah, cool,
Okay.
huh? And gloves, which they called data gloves. And the founders, Joan and Thomas, they were actually former Atari employees working as programmers at Atari. And I'm glad we finally get to talk about John because he's a video game hero we haven't spoken about yet at all in our podcast. Jaron doesn't belong to the realm of video games exclusively, though. He's also a computer scientist and, of course, virtual reality pioneer, amongst many other things, too. Like, he's a futurist, a technologist. This guy's just absolutely amazing. He's been in Time
Nice.
magazine as, like, one of the most influential people. Honestly, this guy's crazy, and we really need to cover him in a future episode because, really quickly, for example, he created the first ever art video game, Moondust, from 1983. So stay tuned, Player One, when Gaming History Club will return to this topic in future as well.
Oh, are we going to talk about art video game in the future?
Of course we do.
Nice, okay.
By 1987, Jaron also finally coins the term virtual reality, or at the very least he popularizes it. Crazy to think that it's been more than 50 years after Stanley Weinbaum envisioned the concept in a short story, Pygmalion Spectacles, and now we finally have a name that solidifies the entire idea of virtual reality.
So by this time, the stage is definitely set, Player One, and we can finally look into VR's impact in video games now. But before we do, just know that VR and AR, in the mid to late 80s basically, start to get popular quickly with people finding uses for it outside of entertainment and research. In the flight industry, for example, and NASA, it's being used to help train people as well as feed computer-generated information into helmets, just to give an example. But you know what, as usual, we're here for the video games, right?
That's right.
So remember VPL research and how they made the iPhone and the data glove? But yeah, anyway, does the data glove sound kind of funny to you or remind you of anything?
It reminds me of something.
Another gloves in video games? But yeah, so Jaron and Thomas from VPL research actually worked together with Mattel and Nintendo and used the technology from the data glove, but made it cheaper to make it viable purchase for video gamers. Unfortunately, compromising much on the accuracy of the glove itself. Again, does it sound familiar at this point? But yeah, if you haven't guessed it, it's the first VR product we're talking about, which is the Power Glove for the NES that's released in October 89. Do you want to talk about the Power Glove, JP, knowing how much you love it?
Oh boy, do I. Yeah, so if it seems a bit odd to you, player one, just keep in mind how we discuss what defines a virtual reality. And even though it's a little bit basic and kind of straightforward, using a real glove to interact with balls in a video game playing on your TV totally counts as a VR experience.
That's true.
Only 2 games were made specifically for use with the Power Glove, and that's Super Glove Ball, a game about catching and releasing balls, and Bat Street Brawler, and it's a beat-em-up game, basically, straightforward. However, truth be told, any game was playable using the Power Glove technically. The reality was that no games were playable with the Power Glove, if you know what I mean, player one.
Yeah, I guess Power Glove just didn't live up to expectation.
No, and you know what? It looks cool with its RoboCop-inspired design, which, by the way, epic foreshadowing earlier when you used RoboCop as well. It lacks the full force of the Data Glove that Thomas Zimmerman patented and invented. So the Data Glove boasts yaw, pitch, and roll detection, and you can think of those as like any direction an airplane can move. And it can detect 256 positions on each finger, not counting the pinky. The Power Glove, on the other hand, uses a different type of sensor that can only detect roll and 4 separate positions per finger. But we're certainly not going to make fun of VPL research here at Gaming History Club, because to make a $100 version of a $10,000 cutting-edge technology product in only 8 weeks, I couldn't do that either.
Well, you just, took 2 zeros of it, as simple as.
Yeah, okay. Sure. How are you going to make it that much cheaper? Just make it real bad, yeah.
Just make it real bad.
Commercially speaking, the Power Glove was a success, selling nearly 1 million units. But this did not stop the bad feedback from video gamers. And sadly, VPL Research as a company paid the price by having to declare bankruptcy the following year in 1990. And as a quick little trivial side note, the patents were actually bought by Sun Microsystems, the creators of the Java programming language.
Oh my God. Yeah, another thing.
That's a small world. And yes, what do we learn from this, Gabby?
Apparently data is more valuable than power.
I've put that in my notes. I was trying to read that out. That's fine.
But yeah, apparently Power Glove is not so powerful after all. But you know what? We didn't come here to talk about gloves, right? I mean, you probably think when we talk about VR, you will hear more about the headsets. So I'll give you that. There was one earlier VR experience in the arcade, seemingly as a bit of a curveball in VR video game history. But let us remember Battlezone for the arcades from the 80s. Technically, that could be seen as the first VR game ever, or what do you think?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. So it feels like a bit of a cheap trick because, I mean, you have a periscope, right, that you can just put your head into? Similar like the Sensorama, actually.
Yep, because the difference is that you look into a periscope to the screen. It kind of is still like an arcade machine in a way, but you look through it from a periscope. So there you go, it feels like a VR. But that doesn't mean we should take any credit away from it. It did a lot with very little resource that it has.
Absolutely. I think it counts. It does count. Who cares that it's easy and cheap? Well, joke's on everyone else who didn't do it that way.
I know, because that's actually a lot cooler, and we love Battlezone for that, although I could never reach that high periscope.
Yeah, and them joysticks are really hard to turn, let me tell you.
I know. Oh my God. Yeah, we tried Battlezone a few times. And trust me, Player One, we're just really not good at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, soon after Mattel manufactured Power Gloves for the NES, Nintendo would begin to conceptualize and develop their own ideas for the next level immersion VR could offer. Nintendo's main man behind the Game Boy, Gunpei Yokoi, was fascinated by new display technology that was still primitive at that time, but becoming inexpensive to incorporate into video game consoles. So, yeah, sounds like a good idea, right?
It does sound like a good idea.
The project was given a codename VR32. I'm not too sure why 32. Is that taking like 32 attempts or something?
32 bits? I don't know.
I don't know, yeah. But that would be developed over the course of 4 years. However, Nintendo was becoming focused heavily on development of Nintendo 64 instead, and started to rush their project for release, this VR32 project. So in 1995, they released the Virtual Boy.
Oh boy, the Virtual Boy was an ambitious idea and was doomed to fail as the display technology just wasn't advanced enough to make it a marketable, cheap, and good quality video game console all in one.
I feel bad for laughing at Power Glove before because I should have saved it for Virtual Boy.
We should have saved up a little bit of that ridicule, but here we are. With its trademark black and red colors, video gamers looked through the periscope standing on legs alien contraption thing, if that's the best way I can describe what it looks like, and you could play a library of only 22 games before the Virtual Boy ceased to exist only 1 year later. It wasn't impossible to have a decent video game VR experience in 1995. It was simply too expensive to sell it to regular households though. The problem with the Virtual Boy were many. It gave gamers headaches. It wasn't really portable, but it was made to look like it was by being battery powered. The so-called 3D effect was certainly not impressive, and there were only 2 colors, and for all of this you'd still have to pay a relatively high price. But let's move on because while it deserves its place in history, the Virtual Boy, just like the Power Glove, have been made ridiculed enough as it is. I'm sure Nintendo wishes they had simply never put the VR32 out, just to work hard on a Nintendo 64. They should have probably just left it there and, okay, stop that. Who cares? We developed it for 4 years for nothing. But, they concentrated on the N64, one of the best consoles all time. You can't have it all Nintendo, basically.
Yeah, they could have also just delayed the release of Virtual Boy because at the end of the day, it could have been something good.
Maybe in a different reality. Maybe in a virtual reality.
Well, truth be told, in mainstream gaming, VR was not explored much at all following the Virtual Boy. There were some arcades that did offer a little bit like a VR experience thing, but not really real VR, I would say. But they were few and far between, and certainly for the computer and video games console, VR was seen as too risky and kind of too early to be tried again. It wouldn't be until 2009 when a young 16-year-old Long Beach, California resident, Palmer Luckey, started tinkering with making his own VR headsets. Well, Palmer announced the Oculus Rift VR headset in 2013, and it was released in 2016. Palmer and the Oculus Rift are widely credited for bringing VR back, not yet into the mainstream, but at least back on the map.
Yeah, and none other than id Software's John Carmack. Listen, Player One, at this point we expect you to know who this man is, by the way. Just to reiterate, this is Mr. Doom himself, okay? He actually supported Palmer as well to develop a working version of Doom 3 for the Oculus. It's believed that this actually directly led to Facebook acquiring the Oculus in 2014 for $2 billion.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, well, imagine if you were a 16-year-old tinkering away at VR headsets and then it's just a smooth 10 years later, there's $2 billion for your tinkering. Man, I did waste my youth, let me tell you.
I know, yeah. We could have done more.
But it also led to id Software's parent company, ZeniMax, to sue Oculus for intellectual property theft for stealing the goodwill of John Carmack.
Okay.
Yeah, I bet John was not pleased about this, but hey, we all have our overlords to deal with, John. It's cool. Yeah, Player One, and this obviously turned into the Meta Quest, and that's currently the most popular of all VR headsets, which we mentioned during our opening as well. I'm going to be honest with you. We're stopping talking about history now and kind of about the modern state of affairs at this point. So I feel like this is probably a very good time to call it the end of today's episode. So, Player One, we hope you enjoyed this episode where we've explained virtually everything about the evolution of virtual reality.
Yeah, what do you think about VR, Player One? Do you like playing VR? What's your favorite VR games? Let us know by dropping us a message on our website, gaminghistory.club. New episodes of Gaming History Club are released every other Wednesday. Make sure you subscribe and follow us on our social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook as Gaming History Club.
Come back in a couple of weeks, Player One, when we take a look at the art of punishment and resilience in video games. See ya.